So today for Gall's question time, I've got the pleasure of being joined by Peter Gostev from Moonpig. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Andrew.
So great to see you, Peter. We've known each other for a little while now. Been following your fantastic posts about AI on LinkedIn, and we met at the AI dinner. So I'm really pleased to be able to have a chat with you today about how AI is affecting business. So could you kick off by giving us an introduction to yourself and Moonpig, please?
Yeah, sure. I've only been at Moonpig for about 6 months, but my role here is to uh, really lead the AI agenda. All really ranging from getting people to use tools better and all the way through to just thinking up crazy ideas and see how we can implement them. And Moonpig, for those who don't know, is a greetings card and gifts retailer. And the interesting thing about that is that we've got obviously the core business is quite uh, open. I used to be in a bank before and financial services more generally, and there's not much you can do with that. There's not a lot of risk taking involved. So that's what I really enjoy about Moonpig, that we can experiment, we can think up interesting ideas to really make experience for customers better, improve our operations. Um, and yeah, I think the scope for innovation is really high. So yeah, we'll introduce a lot of interesting things.
Yes, yes, certainly a very fertile environment to be able to experiment with new things and personalize experiences for customers in all sorts of ways. So it's great, great ground for working on that. So thinking about Moonpig or thinking more strategically, more broader within organizations, how do you think AI is going to be impacting businesses in terms of Gen AI, the latest sort of large language models that have come out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's certainly, as of today, there's I think the expectations probably getting ahead of where we are in practice, and it's interesting to think about how that could pan out in the future. So I'd say as of today, from at least what I have seen, is I think organizations have been pretty good at adopting a few tools, such as like Copilot or ChatGPT or coding assistants, things like that. They've got a little bit of impact, but probably not huge. And then I've seen some maybe interesting applications that are not maybe too impactful yet, such as kind of chat to your documentation, chat to your data kind of applications where we just basically introduce organizational data to the LLM and make it just more accessible. And I think results have been, I think, okay for now. So it's interesting, but not that impactful. And I think what we need to do is to make that shift towards thinking up applications that are maybe not just around the edges, but really uh, maybe approaching it from AI first principles and thinking actually if we were to redesign, yeah, be it customer service function or marketing function with AI first in mind, like what would that actually look like? So I think as of today, I think the implications have been a little bit maybe underwhelming. I think uh, at least all for an average organizations, but I think there's still a lot we can do.
Yeah, I don't know about my perspective. I've seen is that a lot of people just haven't really experienced LLM and GPTs and that so far. My background is about how 20 plus years in how technology is changing business models, and I see similarities to the internet sort of type time. And when people now, I'm speaking to people in business, a lot of people have sort of said, "Oh yeah, I tried GPT once and it didn't work. It just didn't give me the right sort of answer." And I said, "Well, you really haven't tried it. Are you finding that, or are you finding a lot more engagement than that with people?"
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think it is this slight difficulty I think in this technology that I think it's really easy to try, and the barriers to trying it a little bit are very low. But and as in you can just go to ChatGPT and actually try a pretty good model now or to Claude. But to actually try it well and use it for some kind of real use case is actually quite difficult. And yeah, I'm definitely experiencing this, and I would be speaking to some of my colleagues, and they would certainly try, but s- y- as you actually try to implement some of those ideas, you realize how much tacit knowledge you build up after you interact with these models quite a lot, especially as they add the new functionalities such as in ChatGPT. You can run code there in a more deterministic way. You can analyze documents, or you can use vision models to understand what the images or screenshots look like. And you realize how much extra undocumented functionality there is, or what does work, what doesn't work, what is quite hazy whether it works or not. I was working on one use case where we were just basically just debugging words. So sitting side by side, just seeing like how would you actually say that? Or no, we should like move these words around, move this up a bit, and it starts working. So it's really quite tricky at the moment to just get these use cases over the line. So yeah, I think if an average person just tries it casually, I think they'll probably be disappointed. And I think uh, what really works is spending a lot of time in a dedicated way and just try and solve the problem, just focusing it
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
get it over the line.
Yeah, so certainly what I found is I've now run a number of workshops where I've taken people through a 4 hour online or in a day about analyzing documents, analyzing images, creating images, just to get those wow moments to sort of give some
Mm.
examples of look at the potential. But also, I agree with you, there are pitfalls at the moment. But I think the challenge is you can't really look at your business processes until you understand a bit about what the system and that can do, because it's like, I sort of give examples. It's back when you had a water mill, in the industrial revolution, and said, well, we now want to re-engineer your factory because we've invented electricity and electric motors. It's like, well, you wouldn't have a concept of that
Mm.
until you actually sort of saw it and started using it. And with the internet, Jeff Bezos in the mid to late 90s had his vision of starting to sell books for everything retail, but the rest of us were, oh
Mm.
well, people online are weird. They're never going to buy things online, and it sort of
Yeah.
changes. So I'm partly seeing that. So do you think the AI is in the 1990s or early 2000s or before that? Where do you think the potential is going to go?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell. Like I I see a lot of different opinions, and I think we right now range from the opinions of it's pretty much as good as LLM is gonna get, and maybe we can limit it to LLMs. Who knows what else is gonna come around the corner? But
Right.
there are views that it's kind of flattening out, and I think the argument for that is that we had GPT-4, it finished training in towards the end of 2022, and now is middle of 2024. And did we really get anything like particularly better than GPT-4? And I would say not really. The counter argument to that is that we need to wait for GPT-5 to see what the difference is. If the difference is slight, then I think it's probably a good argument that we are slowing down a lot. But it's interesting hearing, for example, the Microsoft CTO speak. He doesn't come across as a kind of overexcited person, but he was uh, very bullish about the capabilities of the next model. So I'm still in a camp that I think there's a lot to go, but I think I also hear about people talking about AGI, and there was some news recently about AI, OpenAI researchers and others talking about AGI in 2027 or something. I personally don't believe that at all. I think we're gonna get better models, but I think AGI and things like that are really, really hard. So I don't know where it puts me in terms of the decades. I don't know, maybe 2005 or something like that.
Yeah. No, I think you're raising a good point though, that or thing that I think about is that we're not necessarily creating something that's going to replace humans yet. It's about how can we use these tools in the meantime, as good as they are at the moment, to change business processes. And they're likely to get better because they're going to get more refined. They're going to get more particular use cases. So I'm interested in sort of getting your views about the people change and process change aspects, and that within organizations, because you and I can use it at the moment to help us rewrite an email or to write a document or analyze an image. But when you change a business process and you change how your customers interrelate with you or your suppliers interrelate, what do you think that dynamic is going to be for process change and changing people in the organizations with AI?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually just thinking about this in the last few days when we're looking at some customer service use cases. And one of the, I think, big changes, the way if we were to go ahead with it, is how our kind of setup will change. So right now, for a lot of processes, we have people and they kind of do the work, and it's a little bit fuzzy. Some do it better, some do it worse. They kind of get coached, and we kind of almost like muddle through, and not in a bad way, but it's just that's how things work. And I think if we were to completely switch to like AI first, say customer service or pick any other process, it becomes really important for us to document all of our processes in a very precise way, because AI cannot kind of go and speak to the manager and just say, "Oh, can I just double check how I do this again?"
Yeah, yeah.
I We need to actually write it down. And I think right now, I think a lot of organizations don't have those processes like written down very precisely, or they might be out of date, or I think it's just not it was never quite needed. Having some kind of general training documents was enough. And I think for us to embrace that fully, I think one of the big blockers is that we do not have it written down. And I think that's the kind of maybe knowledge management uh,
Yeah.
capability that's required. And I think it feels like knowledge management was a big thing maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago. And I think now it has to come back, because now the knowledge base has to be excellent for the AI to understand and kind of glean from there. And I would say another point on the people side is that in order to facilitate that, the people need to turn into more managers of these models. I think there was a nice analogy someone made that large language models are kind of limited interns, that they're doing a good job quickly, but you still need to really oversee them and what they do. And I think that's the big thing here, is that if we were to, let's say, in customer service, transition to that model, we have to have very good managers who look at all the processes, who can instruct the model what to do. And I think that kind of mode of operation, we don't really have that in many places yet.
Yeah, no, excellent points. Excellent. I agree with you around that. You need to understand what your process is, because if you don't, as you said, the system will fall down, or the AI will hallucinate. It will make things up to fill the gaps that you haven't sort of put within the process, and
Yeah.
then the human said, "Oh, but it got it wrong." Whereas,
Mm.
well, it's you didn't specify the process right. I think in a number of implementations and work that I've done as well, the data becomes so much more important as well, which builds on your point. We found now I've been building some investments, AI support sort of systems, and then when you discover that, okay, well, you were missing information like company house number for the venture that was pitching, so you now can't do the API to
Mm.
company's house to find out whether that business is still around. Well, the human in the task previously would have just done a search.
Mm.
Well, complete the data, and you can use AI to read the pitch decks and it to classify very effectively those sort of startups. But you need to be in there sort of working with it. I think also your point about the people and it being an intelligent intern, I think, is also excellent as well, because on the workshops that I run, I do tell people, I said, look, you need to think about this as an assistant. Now, either it could be, when you prompt, you ask the AI to be like an expert non-exec director. Now advise me about reading this shareholder agreement and reading this founders agreement, and it gives you a very good briefing.
Mhm.
But most tasks, I do tell people, yeah, you just need to think of it as if it's your first intern who comes in and does the job. And if you don't brief them properly, and they don't do, you know, they're going to do a job and they're going to try and satisfy you by doing the job. So I think that's a very good framing in that of it to think of.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, it's actually I like your data point, and I think one thing that I think is a little bit different with uh, between more traditional machine learning and like supervised machine learning and interaction with large language models, which I think slightly helps on the data side. So what I mean by that is normally when I was at NatWest and we were running machine learning projects, like the quality of training data was the biggest problem that we would go into the business. It could be like a fraud business, and sometimes the data would just be not good enough and we just walk away. In other cases, it will take us 6 months to prepare the data, and that's like in a bank. Um, uh, which, if you're a startup and you just don't have any data, then what could you even do? And I
yeah,
think the nice thing about large language models is that if you, for inference, and if you just don't touch the model, if you just leave it alone, but you for inference, if you can write instructions well, and by writing instructions well, I don't just mean kind of getting the sequence of words right, but you instill in it, for example, it could be your process, could be your knowledge expertise, and you embed that in, then you actually don't need data in some cases. So in that particular case, you could start already automating the process without actually having to invest a lot. So it doesn't apply to everything, but I think there are some cases where actually you can kind of, because these are pre models that are pre-trained with a lot of data, you can actually kind of go around the lack of data point as well.
yeah. No, great, great. So, so thinking a bit more about the AI partners are going to become quite important and that within this, you know, who's your partner that you're going to put your database in the cloud with to then use their large language model? How are you going to keep up with the speed of change of this sort of stuff? And I think we're now in a different world of you're not going to have large IT systems, and you could code your systems faster now using AI to write GitHub and sort of stuff like that. But I don't think organizations are going to just run all of this stuff themselves. There's going to be this area in between with partners. So how do you feel the landscape is going to be now for software development, AI development, managing these systems going forward with the rapid change that's happening?
Yeah, I think there are probably few angles we can look at. I think there's one, maybe the simplest angle is just like your vendors that have these tools. And I think we've seen like big differences between different vendors. Like for example, I know Microsoft obviously were focusing on Copilot for a while. So I think they're clearly making a big bet there. So but I think we had some vendors where you're just kind of waiting. Well, are you actually going to release that feature, and then nothing happens. So I think that's interesting also to see like how quickly different vendors and what kind of approach they will take. Or actually, some implementations I've seen like are so basic and so naive that they kind of can market it as a AI feature, but then it's like, okay, that's actually not helpful at all. I might as well just like use free version of ChatGPT or something. So it's
Yeah,
not a, so I think there's a big disparity there. But I think maybe an interesting dimension to explore, and I don't quite know whether what I'm going to say is accurate, but I think there was worry about lock-in for large language model vendors, and people I think were, yeah, we're gonna just use OpenAI and gonna be locked into that. It really doesn't feel like lock-in is a problem at all. Like at least for now, I think it's fairly straightforward to switch between different models. I think part of it is that because OpenAI were the first ones, they defined the like API structure, even like small things about like how is the API structured, and basically the rest of the industry pretty much used it as a standard to build their own APIs kind of with that in mind. Even like basic things like here's a system message, here's a user message that is not inherently needed, but most vendors now adopt that approach. And I've seen already some kind of packages that they just let you route between different models. So I think that's a kind of interesting point that I actually think that lock-in is much less just on the pure model side. And I think data lock-in as well is not as bad. So I think, for example, if you've got all your data in AWS, but you want to use OpenAI models, like you could actually just have Azure Cloud, for example, and just use that for inference. And okay, there'll be some problems with not problems, but just like a bit more complexity of moving data between. But actually, you're probably not moving that much data. So you can probably manage that as well. So I think the I don't think there is that much of an issue with model lock-in for now. We'll see how things will develop. And I think where there'll be more of a complexity is all of the other stuff, such as, yeah, where your actual processes are managed, where does your, if you're doing data retrieval, where does that sit? Like if there's like some authentication steps, where's that? And but that's all kind of old issues we always had. So
Yeah.
it, yeah, it feels to me like the model side and the partnering there, more coming back to your original point. I think it probably just lock-in is not much of an issue. So I would say just pick the best model. I always pick OpenAI for now. So I think I kind of bet on them to be ahead for now. But yeah, we'll see how the field develops.
Yeah. And what's your feeling around sort of performance measures? How are you sort of tracking now in your organization whether these things are being effective, whether they're saving costs, whether they're improving the customer experience? What sort of things are you starting to see or trying to not monitor?
Yeah, I think that there is probably one version of that answer that's pretty boring. Like we don't really have any like particular new metrics. So as in like if it's cost reduction, it's just cost reduction. If it's like improved conversion, is just that. And it's on purpose, so we're aligned with just the regular business goals. There is also, I think, the more detailed metrics and how do we evaluate that these models actually perform at scale. And this is really hard. So there are some elements that we could test at scale, such as, for example, like I needed to return the output in this format. Does it do that? And that's just yes or no situation. But we had one use case where we want to, for example, at Moonpig, we've got 50,000 greeting cards. And one of the use cases we've got is we want to be able to use the vision model to describe the cards that then we can use for search, for just kind of user provided information, then also for a few other things that behind the scenes. And it's actually relatively important that it understands the joke and
Yeah,
understand.
I was gonna say, I've done some experimenting, and on the workshops I do, I showed GPT some images, and everything from me on the beach doing the Christmas Day swim through to art, from the National Gallery. I'm trying to get my head around, knowing some of the images you got on Moonpig, the sort of descriptions it's going to come out with some of the characters and the nuance of the jokes and that on that. It must be quite a task or quite funny seeing how it thinks about them.
Yeah, and you know what? I've actually been very impressed. Like I actually like every time I was doing a demo of that capability once in a while, and I try and just pick some random cards that I haven't tried before. And every time like I'm a little bit nervous for it. Like is it
Yeah.
right? And like most of the time it's actually really good. I think there's a point that's at some point like did it get like the joke exactly? Probably doesn't matter all that much, but it needs to still understand that, for example, we really cannot tag some kind of inappropriate root cards with sympathy, right? That will be like highly inappropriate. So we've got some
Yeah.
cases where it's just okay, it's not super high risk, but it's just wouldn't be a nice user experience if you're just seeing inappropriate cards. So we also want to get that right. So
But I just an interesting point there, Peter. It's like, well, how good is the AI compared to a human? Because I can imagine showing a Moonpig card to my mother, my father, my wife, or my
mm,
daughters.
yeah,
They would all take that image in a different way as well.
Yeah.
As so, is GPT any different to a different human interaction with the card of, oh, I didn't get that, or oh, that's disgusting. I don't think that's, so I think there's different human interactions with it as well. So I don't think
Yeah.
GPT is any better or worse. They do say that GPT, oh, it's just the average. It's not going to pick the
Mm.
extremes up or whatever like that. I don't know. I think
Yeah.
sometimes it does pick up things that I don't
Yeah.
see. And
I've used it to explain jokes to me occasionally. So yeah, I think it does do it better sometimes. Yeah. No, for sure.
yeah, it's probably a cultural thing as well. Say from
Yeah.
which country you're from, as comedians often make a joke
Yeah.
about the Germans are different from the Brits, are different from the Americans or whatever.
Oh,
So
that's actually interesting point is that one of the things that it consistently fails at is actually kind of local British references. So like TV shows or some kind of smaller celebrities, as in smaller on the global scale, like everyone knows them in the UK, but because it's probably more Americanized, it actually
okay,
doesn't pick up on that. Yeah, and we also tested, we've got a Dutch brand as well, and Greets, and we tested some of the Dutch cards. And in there, it does actually a really good job. But again, if they're like local phrases, they don't actually mean like literal sense, but it just means
yeah,
like
of
it's
course,
local phrase, then it also sometimes struggled with that a little bit. So
yeah, yeah,
it's and that's part of the problem coming back to a question about like how do we measure these things is
yeah,
that there's not really any way to measure that
yeah,
unless a human who understands the context, understands the language and so on, actually reads it in detail and says, is this good or not?
yes, yeah,
So there are some dimensions where there's just not a good way to measure. And I can't even imagine what the good way is, because you almost need like a better AI to measure it. Which is, by the way, is also a thing where people kind of use more powerful model to just judge whether the
yeah,
lower
yeah,
model
yeah, yeah.
did a good job
And
on.
and I guess within Moonpig, can you train the model and that as well? Can you now, as you're going through that process with your Dutch colleagues, saying, "Oh, that's a good joke. That's a good joke for this region in Holland," and then the AI will know, "Oh, well, Hans or Frida thinks that these are good jokes, and that now I know." So, are you able to train that, or is that something you don't
Yeah.
do?
So I this is just kind of my hypothesis, but I to me that feels right, is that I think humor is not something you can train on. I think because humor is not, I think while we put it as in one bucket, but I think there are such a big dimension in terms of what we find funny, and it's more unexpected, and they're not, you need to have really good understanding of the world and the local culture and what people would find surprising, or have like a theory of mind of
Yeah,
like how does this person, how would they perceive this in the first instance.
yeah,
uh, and I just don't think we can easily train for that. Certainly not, like we've got 50,000 cards, which is a lot for us, but it's nothing for AI, right? We probably need like,
yeah,
I don't know, a million cards. Maybe it will pick something up, but I
yeah.
don't think we can really train for that.
But I think that raises up a point though in terms of other applications of AI, because I'm working with law firms and consulting firms um, and marketing companies, and whether the AI will be as good as a very good creative marketing person. So the similar thing with your jokes sort of type scenario, a marketing campaign is really good because somebody has picked up a nuance, or because the customers start seeing it and start reacting to it, then the company then says, "Oh, that was a good ad because of this, and we'll do a bit more of it." So I think there is this bit about how do you interact with the AI, and back to one of your points earlier, if you're treating it like an intern or you're treating it like a copywriter,
Mhm.
sort of stuff like that. It's how you then work with it to pick up the nuances to create a fantastic new marketing campaign, or in your case, a fantastic new card that jumps off the shelf because it happens to hit the right sort of thing. So, but that's an important bit of how we interact and learn and develop the systems, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think something interesting you said, like whether it can actually like kind of match performance of like top marketers and things like that. My sense, at least right now, I think it's not even close to that. I think despite the some of the benchmarks that we see that these models succeed and so on, I think in reality, I think especially in places like marketing, cultural understanding in a very subtle way and knowing the moment, knowing what's appropriate and so on. I think for now, that's a uniquely human capability. I think models just not good at that. And how could they be, right? I think it's like unfair thing to ask.
Particularly as the point you
Yeah,
made earlier, it's probably been trained on largely North American
yeah.
information. Like I give an example of me speaking Spanish, and then when somebody who understands language and
Mm.
linguistics, so well, that's Mexican Spanish. It's like, well, of course, well,
Yeah,
it's been trained on, that's the bias and that's the training data.
yeah. Oh,
So
that's interesting. Yeah, and maybe I think the way we should think about these models more is not I think if we pick use cases where we're trying to matching up against a person who really is an expert in their field,
yeah,
I think it will, at least for now, it will kind of fail most of the time. If we just do it like head to head. And I think a better type of use cases are things that humans could never really feasibly do. So, for example, I was speaking to one team in performance marketing space. They can write good AdWords that would be like better than what AI can write, but there's only so many that they can write, right? Obviously, they can't spend all day writing them,
yeah,
but AI can, and we could just generate 10,000 of them, 50,000 of them, and just keep going. And then it becomes much more of a kind of numbers game. And coming back to your evaluation point about how do we know which ones are good, we probably need to have like A/B testing at scale of those ads and so on.
yeah,
And but I think then suddenly you're not saying is any particular output from AI better than any particular output from this expert. And I think that's a losing battle. But AI or expert in that area cannot write 10,000 ads, and
yeah.
then AI just like fundamentally better as long as we can solve evaluation problems, or at least find a way of managing that well. So I think these kind of use cases are a lot more interesting, and I think there's a tendency, I think, for us to just for a lot of people, understandably, just to see like, oh, I would have done it like this. How does AI do it? Oh, not so well, so I'm going to move
Yeah,
on.
no, it's a great point, and I think and I think that raises for me examples of where AI is going to start doing things that we never would have done before because they were too expensive and we didn't have
Mm,
enough resources. And, we've had examples of those with AI or internet and mobility type things. So Uber, for example, you now can get a taxi available which can get you to A to B very efficiently in most cities. You don't have to do the knowledge like the black taxis in
mhm,
in London would have done, where the human needed to learn all of those sort of things. Or so things like in startups I work with, being able to get a trademark or being able to write grant applications or whatever like that. Individual startups wouldn't have been able to do those before, but you can now do a lot of that using AI type tools. So lawyers, accountants, or whatever are going to have to start using these tools to provide a different type of service for more people at a cheaper price point than we ever sort of did before. It doesn't mean lawyers are going to be out of a job. It
mm.
doesn't mean that marketing creators are going to be out of a job, as you're saying, but there's going to be other tools that if you're not using them and using AI as an assistant, your business is going to be at a disadvantage. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, completely. Yeah, and I think that's maybe coming back to the beginning of our conversation. I think that's probably one thing that is people find really tricky is that how can they imagine things that they just wouldn't even think of doing before because they're not gonna hire 100 people working for them writing Google ads or whatever it might be. And I think it's really hard for people to make that leap.
Yeah. No, that's a great point to finish up, Peter. Thanks so much for taking us back to that. It's been a great discussion with you and a great journey. I know we're all on this understanding AI. So thank you very much for sharing your time. And I will certainly recommend that people follow you on LinkedIn because some of your posts are fantastic to follow up on what's happening. So thanks very much.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Please subscribe to future interviews and give us a 5-star like. Thank you.